Hey y'all, it's Heel Heat time.
Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles and this is a Heel Heat Top 10. The topic of this Top 10? Hardcore wrestlers. A topic that's near and dear to my heart. All of you people know that I am a fan of the hardcore. We're going to get right into it. Number 10, the backbone and the heart and soul of ECW, Tommy Dreamer. A guy who laid his life and his back and his body on the line over and over again to show fans, to give fans what they appreciate. Did it all basically for us, continues to do it for us, has an excellent independent promotion called House of Hardcore, which has some good hardcore wrestling. It's actually what I would consider the one true evolution of the ECW style. This is what House of Hardcore is what ECW would be if ECW was still around, in my humble opinion. Just an excellent wrestler, an excellent guy, an excellent ambassador for the sport and for the hardcores. Next up, number 9, a guy that many of you may not be familiar with, a Japanese wrestler named Atsushi Onita, and if I pronounced the first name wrong, I'm very sorry. Onita was a guy, he's had legendary feuds with guys like Terry Funk, Hayabusa, Win Kanemaru. He's helped start the FMW promotion in Japan, which was kind of a precursor and kind of a parallel to the ECW promotion in the WWE. Just a guy who would go out there and do exploding C4 matches, barbed wire matches. The C4 match was what he was most famous for. Guy that would, again, he's much like Tommy Dreamer and much like Terry Funk, a guy that put everything on the line. He started off as, much like Terry Funk did, as a guy that was a technical wrestler that evolved into this hardcore brawler. Now, speaking of a brawler, our number 8, one of the guys that's probably one of the better brawling wrestlers in the history of wrestling, a guy who's more known for his entrance than his in-ring talent, the Sandman. What can you say about the guy? He's probably got the best entrance in the history of wrestling. He has a style that's all his own. He drinks, he smokes, he swings a Singapore cane. He's violent. He's not at all technically proficient, but you love him. The guy comes out, hits you with everything under the kitchen sink, most importantly, the Singapore cane, not afraid to use barbed wire, not afraid to use chairs. A guy that really fit the ECW style, really fit in, made himself a star in that promotion. Now our number 7, we just talked about FMW a bit. In my opinion, the biggest star and the biggest wrestler of the FMW era, Hayabusa. Hayabusa has a parallel in the United States, which we'll get to here very shortly. But he was kind of the hybrid, high-flying, high-violence kind of guy. He would use chairs, he would use weapons, he would create moves, he would fly around the ring. I mean, the guy was absolutely amazing. A lot of people's only experience with Hayabusa is the match he did in ECW with him and Jinsei Shinsaki versus RVD and Sabu. But trust me, if you haven't seen his FMW stuff, go back and watch it. The guy is amazing, especially matches with a guy, Mike Awesome, Masato Tanaka, all the stars of that promotion. Guy was outstanding, great wrestler, great ambassador for the sport again. Unfortunately, a freak ring accident where he slipped off the rope left him paralyzed. Sadly, sometimes that happens, but it doesn't overshadow the fact that he was a great wrestler at one point. Our number 6 guy. I just talked about there was an American equivalent to Hayabusa, and that would be the man Sabu. Homicidal, suicidal, genocidal. all terms that were used to explain Sabu, and all 100% correct. When the guy went to the ring, you had no clue what he was going to do, and I bet you half the time he didn't either. He used chairs to flip off of, he used tables, he used barbed wire. I mean, anything that wasn't nailed down, Sabu would use, and use it in a way that no one had ever before. So much of Sabu's work has been copied and amalgamated into other people's work that you kind of slips your mind just how innovative the guy was, and just how breathtaking and how much of a daredevil he was. He was doing flips into the crowd. He was doing moonsaults off of anything. I mean, the guy was absolute mayhem let loose on a wrestling ring. Just an amazing wrestler and an amazing talent, in my opinion. Now, our number 5 guy is one of the guys that I want to say is kind of one of the founders and one of the forefathers of hardcore. That's Abdullah The Butcher, a guy that wrestled from the 60s on, always had the violent, in their time, street fights and no DQ matches is what they would call them, but he always brought a hardcore element to his matches, whether it be using the chairs, whether it be his trademark fork or biting wrestlers. Abdullah was a legitimate badass that really, even when I was a young guy, he used to scare me. And I was a guy that kind of, as a kid, I kind of knew what was going on and kind of knew that it was predetermined and knew that these were just characters. Abdullah was one of the characters that I legitimately believed in what he was doing and believed that he was legitimately dangerous and violent, which is a testament to how good of a worker he was. Now, our number 4 guy had some legendary battles with Abdullah, and among others, and that would be the original Sheik, not the Iron Sheik, the Sheik. The uncle of Sabu, the trainer of Rob Van Dam, the guy that made the Detroit area wrestling what it was, wrestled Cobo Hall, sold it out hundreds of times with Bobo Brazil in a legendary battle over the U.S. title at that time. The Sheik was another guy. He would use an Arabian spike. He's one of the first guys that mastered the art of wrestling in America and Japan and building his legend in both places. He would go over there and he'd wrestle all their top guys and basically bring the hardcore style there, as well as keep it in here in America. He was a guy that left most of his matches he left bloody and bruised, but the other guy left more bloody and more bruised. The legendary Sheik, a guy that's somewhat forgotten in the annals of time, somewhat swept under the rug, but a guy that definitely should be on your radar and someone that you should go back and check, especially if you're a fan of hardcore wrestling. Now, our number 3 guy, whether you call him King Kong or whether you call him Bruiser, King Kong Bruiser Brody, one of my favorites, one of the guys that when I started watching wrestling back in the 80s, just jumped off the television and said, "Watch me." He would swing chains and trash cans. Every one of his matches would end up in the crowd. They'd fight all over the world. He had a legendary feud with Abdullah the Butcher all over the world. Puerto Rico, Japan, America, NWA, World Class Championship Wrestling. All over the place, all Japan Wrestling. Bruiser Brody is an absolute legend, and it's an absolute crime that Bruiser Brody is not in the WWE Hall of Fame. It is a glaring shame. There is a whole generation of wrestlers, half of the roster on WWE at this time, are influenced by the guy. If you watch a Dean Ambrose match, a Luke Harper match, a Bray Wyatt match, all the way up and down, I could go on and on about the guys in there, but half of their damn roster is influenced by the guy, whether they know it or not, whether it's a direct influence or one of their influences being influenced by him. Bruiser Brody is the guy that, unfortunately, he met a tragic end. We're not going to cover that. But he was a guy that was fiercely independent. Probably one of the last independent megastars. He didn't let promoters hold him up for his money. He knew what his character was. He knew what he was doing. He made the impact. He would come in, he would stay a short time, whether it be in the AWA or World Class or the NWA or down in Puerto Rico with Carlos Colon or over in All Japan Wrestling tagging with Stan Hansen or even on solo runs. He would come in, he would make his mark. Before he got stale, he would move on somewhere else. That way it left the fans waiting and wanting for Bruiser Brody to come back into these territories. Just an amazing talent. Like I said earlier, an absolute crime he's not in the WWE Hall of Fame. Now our number 2 guy is a guy that is in the WWE Hall of Fame. Whether you know him as Mankind, Dude Love, or Cactus Jack, or just plain old Mick Foley, probably the guy that took hardcore further than anybody else ever had. Former 3-time WWE champion, WWF at the time, multiple-time tag champion. Everywhere he went, he was tag champion. That seemed to be his thing for a while. A guy who's an absolute legend, my all-time favorite wrestler, an ambassador for what hardcore is, the king of the deathmatch in IWA Japan. I mean, his character is Cactus Jack, even in the early days in Global and in World Class, when he was doing it as part of Shigan Al Casey's army. He had this kind of vibe that I don't think even Brody and Abdullah didn't have. Brody and Abdullah tried to win their matches. Foley, at that time, as Cactus Jack, it didn't seem like he cared if he won or lost as long as he injured the other person. And that to me was so intriguing that the losses didn't mean nothing, the wins didn't mean nothing. The violence is all he cared about. The guy that would dive off the apron and drop an elbow on you, cause him as much pain to himself as he caused to you, just to hurt you. A guy that's done everything, wrestled at barbed wire, fire, thumbtacks, the legendary King of the Ring Hell in a Cell match against The Undertaker. I mean, the guy has made it to the pinnacle of the business and brought hardcore wrestling, like I said, further than anybody else. Now, before we get to our number 1, we're going to go into the best of the rest. Basically, this is guys that just barely missed the list for whatever reason, but they were all considered. Number 1, the Necro Butcher, a guy who over the last 20 years or so has been a stalwart on the American independent scene and somewhat in Japan and Big Japan and other promotions there, as pretty much the new hardcore icon. I mean, the guys, you've seen that he did it on The Wrestler, even in the movie. He's wrestling thumbtacks, barbed wire, light bulbs, exploding this, barbed wire, weed whacker that. A guy that kind of went more with the ultra violent, where it became even more violent. Necro stands out. Doesn't quite get the respect he does because he's actually a really good wrestler under all of that, under all the violence and brawling. But Necro Butcher, a guy that's one of the best of the rest. Next up, John Zandig, the guy that's most known for being the original owner of CZW and the stalwart there. Zandig took what ECW was doing and took what FMW was doing and XPW were doing, and he raised the level of the violence. Now, a lot of people don't like what CZW did, especially early CZW. To me, it's hit or miss. Some of it's very good, some of it's very bad. But Zandig went out there, he said, I'm going to take it to a new level, I'm going to make it more violent, I'm going to make it more extreme. And he continued to do that. Hats off to him. Next up, New Jack. Probably one of the wrestlers that in real life you don't want to see in a dark alley. One of the guys that whether he's doing a shoot interview or wrestling a match, you believe in him and how violent he is. He has such infamous incidents like the scaffold with Vic Grimes, where he tried to basically kill Vic Grimes after Vic Grimes caused him injury in a different scaffold fall. Again, a guy that has multiple falls off of scaffolds. Come on, guys. A guy that would dive off of the balconies of buildings, willingly to injure his opponents. A guy that's known for the mass transit incident, which, if you don't know what it is, look it up. Don't eat anything before you do, because it's violent. But anyway, one of the most violent wrestlers I've ever seen. A guy that just his presence and his persona and who he is made it so believable. And last but not least, my current favorite hardcore wrestler, Hardcore Terry Houston. A guy that you've seen on the $5 wrestling shows, wrestles a lot in the Carolina and Virginia independent scene. Doesn't quite get the acknowledgement and get the national respect I think he deserves. He's a hell of a ring psychologist, a hell of a worker. He's willing to go in there and he's willing to duke it out with anybody. He's been in there with the likes of Masada and with the likes of Necro Butcher. Goes over to $5 wrestling, develops a hardcore following there. Guys that you see what Terry Houston is and who he is, and he just has a general love and passion for the business. To me, he's my favorite hardcore wrestler right now. I think he's absolutely one of the best. I love what the man's doing. And as a person, he's an amazing person as well. I love Terry Houston, my favorite current hardcore wrestler. Now, back to the list, going into our number one, can only be one man. It's the hardcore legend himself, Chainsaw Charlie, Terry Funk. When I think hardcore wrestling, there are a few people that come in my mind. And probably the first one that I think is Terry Funk. The guy that evolved with the sport, came into wrestling as a pure wrestler, as a catch-as-catch-can wrestler, or whatever you want to call it, redefined himself, over the years became more and more violent, became more of a leader, the guy that I think paved the way for the ECW style, paved the way for XPW, paved the way for FMW, the Wing promotion. He's the guy that made all of it possible. He's the guy that everybody wanted to be. Terry Funk, probably one of the most respected wrestlers in the history of the business, one of the great wrestlers in the history of business, one of the guys that could do absolutely anything in the ring, a guy that legitimately would go out there and beat the crap out of himself, beat the crap out of yourself, leave the fans wanting more every time, a guy that to this day has retired 20 times. And I guarantee you, if he came back and wrestled another match, there would be hundreds of people showing up to see him just because of how awesome he is. Terry Funk, I think, in my opinion, is the epitome of a hardcore wrestler, what they should be. The toughness, the dedication, the love of the sport, the ring psychology, everything about Terry Funk is what wrestling should be. Whether it's hardcore or not. Everything the man has stood for over the last 50 years in wrestling, 50, is exactly what professional wrestling should be. It should be about honor, respect, and dedication. And that's Terry Funk to a T. In my opinion, one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, hardcore or not. Even if you took his hardcore stuff away, he's an amazing wrestler, an NWA world champion, a WCW world champion. I mean, the guy is every aspect of the business. Terry Funk did excellent. He can talk you into a building. He can make you think that he hates his best friend when he's fighting Mick Foley. He can make you think that he loves his worst enemy. Absolute master of the art of wrestling. A guy I think doesn't get the respect, isn't talked about when people bring up the greatest wrestlers of all time, but he really should be. He should be right up there with the Ric Flairs and Harley Races. One of the all-time greats, in my opinion. And like I said, to me, the template of what a professional wrestler should be. But basically, that's all I have to say about that. My name is George Coles, and this has been another Heel Heat Top 10.